Always a pleasure to teach on the Bet Knesset Hanasi Shir, and it's always an honor to stand in for Rabbi Kimchi. It's a second-rate stand-in. I get that totally. You're always better with the Kli Rishon and the Kli Sheni. But nevertheless, hopefully we'll get something. We'll be able to do something together. So I have actually just shared the document on the chat as well. I will of course share it on the screen too, and you can get it from Ellie directly if that doesn't work for any reason. Okay, so I think most people know that we are in a very special period now. Everybody knows it's Sfiras HaOmer. And as I say, I think most people are aware of the Ramban, who talks about the fact that Sfiras HaOmer is like a Chol HaMoed. You have Pesach, which is the first Chag at the beginning, and then you have a period of building up to the final Chag, which is parallel to Sukkot, where you have Sukkot at the beginning and then Shmini Atzeret at the end. You have here Pesach at the beginning and a longer build-up, not 7 days, but 7 times 7 days. 49 days to a Shavuos at the end. And of course, that's one of the reasons why Chazal, the rabbis of the Gemara, call Shavuot Atzeret, that they give it that name to highlight that area, that idea that this is a Chol HaMoed period. Now, the Ashkenazim, for various reasons historically through the Crusades, etc., suffered a lot during this period, and that's why Sfiras HaOmer, especially for the Ashkenazim, took on a sort of quasi Avelut type feel. It's not really Avelut, it's nothing like the 3 weeks and the 9 days. People often confuse that, but there's this kind of a reluctance to be marbe b'simcha during this period. But in essence, it's a Chol HaMoed. And in Israel today, certainly in the more religious Zionist focused communities, there's a double kind of Chol HaMoed, because there's also a feel of the period between Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. Now, okay, Yom Yerushalayim you'll find is much bigger in Yerushalayim. If you go to Petach Tikva, okay, Yom Yerushalayim is less of a big event, but nevertheless, the flags are out in the streets, and therefore this period for people who are focused on the modern state of Israel also has a Chol HaMoed feel, and that's what I really want to bring in right now, because for those of you, Eli mentioned my shirim and the OU. For those of you who have been on those shirim in the last few weeks, we've been dealing with a few issues of kibbutz galuyot and religious Zionism. Not the shir today. The shir today is a completely different shir, which even if you were on the OU shirim, you will still hopefully be able to enjoy this one. But we've been focusing on that a little bit more in the OU shirim. And if anyone's interested in picking up those 3 shirim, you can get them off my website on rabbimanning.com. Just go onto the contemporary issues. You'll see an Israel section. You can get them there. But as I said, today, I want to give you something new and specific to this shir, which I've called Rav Kook and the State of Israel, Redemption, Confusion, and Mashiach ben Yosef. Now, of course, you're all thinking, well, one second, Rav Kook never saw the State of Israel. He died, of course, in 1935. Correct, and he never spoke at length about the idea of a state of Israel. He does talk about that, and that obviously was brewing in his time. He was in London. Many of you, I'm sure, will be aware. Rav Kook was in London during the First World War. He was stranded there. When he went, he tried to get to an Aguda conference. Not always, I suppose, a good idea, depending on what you're going to say there, but he tried to get there in 1914. The First World War broke out, and he failed, and he was stranded with his wife in Europe, eventually made it to London. There is actually a nice connection, by the way, with Rabbi Kimchi. He can tell you the story himself. But when Rav Kook was in Switzerland, before he made it to London, so Rav Kimchi's grandfather was his host in Switzerland. And there are all sorts of stories to tell there, which I'll leave Rabbi Kimchi to tell. But eventually he made it to London, and he was there for the Balfour Declaration. I'm sure spiritually there was a very strong connection that if you look at the history of the Balfour Declaration, that all of a sudden, after years of predictable old school politicians in England, for 2 or 3 years, there was this unusual period of Lloyd George and Balfour and the whole strange Welsh and Christian evangelical input into that. And that's the period of the Balfour Declaration. It's miraculous in the way that it fits together, but Rav Kook was there for that time. But he died in 1935 before the state. His son, of course, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, was very much involved in developing Rav Kook's ideas and also, of course, taking them further. But we are going to look today at the issue of Mashiach ben Yosef, which comes directly from Rav Kook, as we'll see soon. Okay, lots to talk about today. We've got about 55 minutes. So let's see what we can do. I'm happy to take questions maybe at the end or put them on the chat. But let's have a look at this for now. The idea of celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim and even saying Hallel on those days is rooted in a Gemara in Pesachim. Have a look at number 1. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Shir Sheba Torah. Where does the Shira come from? The Song of the Sea. So it says, we know, Moshe v'Yisrael Amru b'shah she'alu min hayam. Moshe and the Jewish people broke out in spontaneous song when they came out of the Red Sea. By the way, very interesting on that. This is not a song of a shir about Shira, but I strongly recommend, if you're interested in this kind of thing, Professor Josh Berman came out with a few svarim recently, and one of them very recently called Ani Ma'amin, where he talks about issues in Tanakh that connect with and inspire, if you like, a sense of emunah, a connection to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. And one of the things he talks about is the Song at the Sea and how the structure of Shirat Hayam is very closely modeled on an ancient Egyptian victory song structure, which I think is absolutely fascinating because it very clearly roots this whole narrative in the ancient Egypt period, which, you know, for us is not a chidush, but in the academic world is. I recommend you to read Professor Berman's articles and books on that, but that's not for today. So the Gemara goes on. The Hallel, what about Hallel? Hallel zemi amru. Where does Hallel come from? So the Gemara says, Neviim shebeineihem tiknu lahem Yisrael. Of course, Hallel is rooted in Tehillim. It is from David HaMelech and Tehillim. And the Neviim at that time made a takana, made a decree. What was that? Shiu oimrim oisa akol perek. They would say it from specific time to time. Of course, for us, that means on the Chagim, when we say Hallel. Va'al kol tsara v'tzara, and on every terrible suffering, shalot havo alehem, it should never come upon them, says the Gemara. But when they do suffer, ukeshenig'alin, when they receive geula, let's not translate it yet. When they receive geula, omrim oto, then we have to say Hallel. Maybe we'll use the word redemption for now. So and we receive what we consider to be a geula, a redemption of a certain kind, then we are obligated to say Hallel. I just got a little wobble on my computer that the internet was unstable. Can you hear me? Do we have a thumbs up? Are you hearing me? Yes? Okay, good. If anything goes wrong on the technology, then please don't worry. I'll try and get back as soon as I can.
Yep.
Okay, are we back again?
We're back again at this moment, yes.
Okay, good. So,
oh dear. It wobbled again.
As I was just saying, please, I hope I am back with you again. Yes, things thumbs up. One thing I can't control is the internet connection to Gush Etzion. It's not what it should be, but maybe as our redemption develops, the internet might get faster. So please keep saying your Zoom Tehillim so that we can hope that the things last. Okay, like I said when I was at the OU shir, when I'm now.
Oh dear.
Now back live again.
You're only back live again for short periods. You're wobbling in between. That's better. I think Rabbi Manning's left us and he'll try and come in again. When he comes in again, hopefully he'll have a better connection. But there's no problem.
Where does he live, Ellie, Gush Etzion? He lives in Alon Shvut?
Yeah, he lives in Alon Shvut, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes, so that's unfortunate. And this is an argument to have the Yishurim back in shul again. There are many arguments to have them back at home, but I guess, I don't know, maybe I may send out an email to attendants to ask them who would be prepared to come in again and listen to shiurim at shul in general, not just for this particular one, for Rabbi Kimchi's, for any other type of shul, just to try and get a feeling of the enthusiasm for live meetings.
Actually, my husband's call just went back to meeting today, Rabbi Rabinovich, Moshe Rabinovich. His first day is today.
Some of them are doing part. In other words, people can join and people can also stay on the internet.
That would be good. That would be the best.
People away. He doesn't seem yet to be back with us. It's a great shame. If we can't get him back live, then I shall ask him to record his shiur, possibly, and then send out a recording to everyone. So
good idea.
Share.
Good idea.
He's always been fairly high tech as Anthony, but I suppose if the internet's not working in Gush Etzion, then there's not much you can do. Yes.
Eddie, maybe you take over.
Well, people have got the sheets over here. It's just a question of reading through his documentation without his jokes, then that might be a possibility. But I doubt it. You can actually, sure, where is it attached? Chat. Everyone who's received my email, I sent one this morning with his 5-page document attached. But it's not like listening to him read through it. I'm expecting him to contact me one way or another. I have his WhatsApp over here. I'm sure he knows he's having problems. To apologize.
Maybe he's giving the shiur to the ether.
Maybe he thinks he's on. No, I don't think he is. I very much doubt it.
Just kidding.
Ellie, you said you sent an email. I don't seem to have received it.
This morning.
No, I just checked.
Did you get one yesterday with the invitation?
Rabbi Kimchi is back on.
Not Rabbi Kimchi.
No, I didn't.
No, Rabbi Manning, I'm sorry.
I didn't get yesterday's.
He is back on. He's well, in that case, you're not on the mailing list, strangely enough.
No, I didn't get either of your emails, Ellie.
That's because you're not on my. I don't have the full shul email list. I have my own list of about 50 or so. I'm not entitled to email the shul. That right was taken away from me.
Why?
It's kept very much close. Only the president and the secretary. And we don't have a secretary at the moment. Anthony is physically on, but he doesn't seem, Rabbi Manning, I should say. He appears at the bottom of the list.
I get your emails for your shiur.
It's funny because I use it for both. I use, no. That's a different list.
Ah.
I've had to put together various lists over time, so I understand that.
So
Okay.
please
So
transfer me.
I'm back with you
I will.
again. Do you hear me now?
At the moment, yes.
I apologize for that. Nothing I can control, I'm afraid. In the event that things go wrong again, I'll try and come in on my phone. But I think all of this is here to tell us that it's time to get back live into Shiurim. I'm sorry, I apologize, but one thing I can't control is the internet access to Gush Etzion, which is not what it should be, but it is what hopefully it will be. Okay, fine. Let's not waste any more time. Thank you for being patient. I apologize for the interruption. So we need to work out what is going on with this idea of Geula. When the Gemara says here that when the Jewish people are redeemed, what does it mean exactly? One of the key precedents for this, by the way, if you look in Rashi there, which I'm not bringing you now, is Hanukkah. He says Hanukkah is the classic example. On Hanukkah, we say we Hallel for 8 days, mirroring Sukkot. That is a classic example of Geula. Now, there's a lot to say about that, but let's first look at the word Geula, and we'll plug this into Rav Kook when we get to Rav Kook at the end. Okay, fine. So let's get back on track. We might have to skip a few sources, but let's keep going. The word Geula for us, redemption, is often colored by the way that we see it through the eyes of Chazal, through the eyes of the Gemara. And therefore, for many people, if you say to them in the street, is this the redemption? They will turn around and say, what are you talking about? Mashiach is not here yet. And you'll turn around and say, well, what's that got to do with Mashiach? I never mentioned Mashiach. I mentioned Geula. Are they indeed the same thing? Now, again, if you look at the redemption through the eyes of Chazal, you will say, yes, that Mashiach and Geula, we put them in the same breath. That is not the case at all. Have a look at a few psukim with me. In Vayik Bahar, okay, how about that? This week's parsha, or next week's parsha. Number 2, if your brother becomes poor, my internet's gone down again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me. I'm really sorry. I don't know why this morning is so challenging. It's not usually this bad. If you become poor and you sell off your ancestral land, says Parshas Bahar, and then a goel comes, then the redeemer comes, hakarov elav, a relative, v'ga'al et mimkar achiv, and he is able to redeem the sale of that land. Ve'ishki lo yeh lo goel, if you don't have a redeemer, okay, if you don't have anyone to come and buy your land back, ve'hisiga yado, but you get the cash together yourself, umatza kedei geulato, you can do geula yourself on the land if you can get the money to buy it back. So what is geula? Geula is buying back the land that you were forced to sell or fell into the hands of someone outside. He talks about it's the geula. Number 4, if somebody becomes very poor,
we're losing you, Rabbi Manning. Big gaps.
if you're not to suggest, would you like me to come in on my phone?
I think you should try. If you can still share screen, do you think? Or would it not be possible? Sorry about this, everyone. Let's hope that Rabbi Manning can join us. He's still online as far as the computer is concerned, but he's probably trying to get through on the phone. So. He's out of the link. Let's hope he comes through again through this phone. Normal service will be resumed. My apologies. Stop recording. Pause.
The benefit of my sofa here, but you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I am going to try and share the screen, but I don't know if I can do that. I'll just give it a very quick try, but we may have to manage without the screen share. 1 second. I'll only give it a minute because otherwise we're going to lose all our time, which is not good. 1 second, please. Okay, this might even work, Be'ezrat Hashem. So let's have a look. I'm not used to doing this on my phone, but let's have a look and see if I can do this. Where would this be? Second. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. I apologize because I can't seem to be able to get the document on my phone to share it, and it'll take too long to try and do that. So can I carry on without it?
Yes.
Ellie, are you able to share your screen?
Let me have a look. I think I can share screen. So if I can get your document.
If you can just pop the document on your screen, then as I'm going through it, you can just scroll down. That might be the best way of doing it.
Second. I may have to download it in order to share it.
Oh, hang on. Okay, 1 second. Is that sharing my screen now, by the way?
It is. It's very small.
Right.
I'm not
1
sure.
second. Can you read 1 second? Let's see if I can do something about that. 1 second. That may be the answer. Okay, fine. So you're hearing me and you're getting the screen now?
Yes, we've got it.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's the best I'm going to get to. I'm sorry. I'm also disadvantaged a little bit that I can't see you. But as long as you can see me, I suppose, and you can see the screen, then that's the best we're going to get. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. I can't see your thumbs ups and thumbs down now. But if you have any problem, Ellie, please jump in and say, I can't hear you or whatever. And I'll keep talking and hope there's somebody listening. Okay, fine. Please God, soon live again. Okay, fine. So we've just seen a bunch of sources that say that Geula is clearly the idea of getting your land back. And as I was just about to say, number 4, here, if you become poor, and then you're sold to a non-Jew who is living in your country, or into a non-Jewish family, and then you see the word Geula comes again and again. After you're sold, there's always a chance for Geula. You can be brought back in to your freedom. One of your brothers, one of your family will redeem you. Or Dodo, maybe it'll be your uncle, or Ben Dodo, or your cousin Yigalenu. Again, the word Geula. Or Mish'ar B'saro Mishpator, another family member Yigalenu will redeem you. Or Hisigiyado, or you can get the cash together yourself. V'nig'al, meaning you see clearly the word Geula in the context of Chumash means nothing to do with Mashiach. It means getting your land back if you've lost it, and getting your independence back if you've lost that. So you see that the word Geula, certainly looking through the lens of Tanakh, is nothing to do directly with the end of days, but it's with a reclaimed independence. And that's one of the reasons why Geula connects with this time of year. And very often I find that people are actually talking somewhat past each other when, religious Zionists say, isn't this the Geula? And more Haredi people say, what are you talking about? Mashiach is not here. Actually, they're talking about two different things. So too, in the Tanakh, if you look in Nach here, I brought you 5 through 8, it's always HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is referred to as the Goel. Okay, number 5, Yigalech Hashem. And number 7, Kifada Hashem is Yaakov Ugalo. So when it says in number 8, Uvalet Zion Goel, then the Goel will come to Zion. So although there are Meforshim that say that's Mashiach, on a Pshat level, that means HaKadosh Baruch Hu will go through the process of Geula. And like I said to you before, the other shirim that I mentioned that I've given that are on my website go into this in more detail. Fine. So let's skip forward a little bit to what we're really trying to get to today, which is the idea of Mashiach ben Yosef. We're going to have to skip through a few stages here. If we get time at the end, we'll come back to them. So the idea of Geula, which comes in a slowly, a kima, step-by-step way, and the sources that I skipped a little bit there talk about this in number 11, the idea of Geula coming, say, Chazal, like the sunrise, slowly as the dawn breaks, not in one flash of light. This is, if you like, connected into the idea of Mashiach. Let's have a look at some of the sources about Mashiach ben Yosef in number 15, and go on from there. You still hearing me, Eli? You're still getting me on this?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. So we don't often speak about Mashiach ben Yosef, but there are lots of mainstream sources about it. Have a look at number 15. Says Zechariah as follows. V'yireni Hashem arba charashim. I was shown, says Zechariah, 4 craftsmen. The Gemara in Sukkah says, Man hinu arba charashim. Who are the 4 craftsmen? So Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rav Shimon Chasida says, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, Eliyahu, and Cohen Sedek. I'm not getting into Cohen Sedek, who is the Shem, the son of Noach. You can look in Rashi and other sources. But I'm focusing here on Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef, both considered to be craftsmen. They have to build something in some way. Zechariah is referring to them. And this idea of Mashiach ben Yosef comes again and again. Look at this pasuk from Yeshayahu, number 17. One of the classic ideas of the Mashiach process is the reconnection of Yosef and Yehuda, who are mending, if you like, the rift that started all the way back in Bereshis. Number 17, V'sarakinas Ephraim, the jealousy of Ephraim will be gone. Ephraim here representing Yosef, but so Re Yehuda Yekaresu, and those who are the aggressors of Yehuda will be stopped. Ephraim lo yikaneh et Yehuda, Yehuda lo yotzor et Ephraim. Both of these camps will be once again reunited with each other. Who are they, says Rashi? Mashiach ben Yosef u'Mashiach ben David. These are the 2 Mashiachim. Lo yikinu ze bazeh. They will no longer have kinah for each other. There's something built into these 2 Mashiachs which seems to be antagonistic, and we'll see what Rav Kook does with that in a minute. Also, I brought you in number 18. There's a Targum Yonason on the anointing of the Kior, which talks about the Mashiach ben Ephraim. You can look at that in your own time. So we need to look here a little bit about what is this friction of the 2 Mashiachim, and how does this relate in any way to the Geula process that we've been talking about before? Okay, fine. Have a look now at let's get into the final lap of this and see if we can build up something. Even though we have some breaks, we'll carry on from here. Look at number 20. Says the Megillah, Umara ulama geula b'shvietz. So why do we have a prediction, says the Gemara, that the geula, whenever it comes, and whatever that means, now we've been redefining it, will come in the 7th year of the cycle. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Mitoch she'asidim legal b'shvietz, or the Rava here, it's asking, why is geula the bracha, the 7th bracha, in Shemona Esrei, Goel Yisrael, and it says because we have a tradition that the Geula will finally come in the 7th year. That's why the Chazal fixed it as the 7th bracha. But then we have another source, B'shishis kolot. In the 6th year, in this run-up to Geula, there will be rumblings, noises, war approaching. B'shviit, in the 7th year, milchamot, the actual wars will happen. But Motzi Shviit, and only in the Motzi Shviit, and after the 7th year, then David HaMelech can come. So why did you just tell me that Geula is in the 7th year when actually we have a tradition that Milchama is in the 7th year, not Geula? So the Gemara famously answers, Milchama nami atchalta de Geula hi. The war itself is the beginning of Geula, and this is the one and only mention in the Gemara itself of this famous phrase, Atchalta de Geula, the beginning of Geula. So you see that the Geula process is not represented by, if you like, the culmination of the redemption, whatever that is and however that works. Again, leaving out Mashiach, getting back our land, getting back our independence, and Mashiach will be down the line. But it's actually the process itself. And from here, we need to get into the Mashiach ben Yosef part of that discussion. Have a look at the Gemara in Sukkah, and this really will provide the foundation for what remains of the Shir. B'yom hahu yigdal misped b'Yerushalayim. So Zechariah says there will be a great eulogy on that day in Yerushalayim. K'misped Hadad Rimon, k'mispad Hadad Rimon, like the hesped that was given for Hadad Rimon, b'bikat Megidon. Back in the Tanakh, Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo. Of course, Megiddo also has connotations of Armageddon, Har Megiddo, all referring to those end of days. Now, what will happen? V'safta haaretz mishpachot mishpachot levad, and the land will eulogize whoever this is for. We'll see mishpachot mishpachot levad, each family by itself. Mishpachat Beit David levad, and David's family will be separate. Unasheim levad, and their wives will be separate. By the way, in parentheses, this is one of the sources as to whether you need to have separate seating at public events. Here, this mispeh, the funeral, the eulogy has men and women apparently separate. And from this, many sources classically said, if that's true of a funeral, then all the more so that's true of a wedding. You have to have separate seating. Okay, other people say you don't. I'm not getting into that sugi now, but just so you know, this is one of the key sources. Now, so the Gemara says, what is happening at this great eulogy that Zechariah is talking about? So, Pligi Bei Rav Dosa Rabbanon. So there's a debate about this. V'chad Amar al Mashiach ben Yosef Shenerag. Oh, this apparently is, at least according to one opinion, a hesped for Mashiach ben Yosef. Why does Mashiach ben Yosef have to die? What is Mashiach ben Yosef? Some wartime procedure of process leading to this Geula. Why does he have to die? So if you look in a number of classic sources, Rav Saadyugon, who does not pull from mystical and Kabbalistic sources, he talks about Mashiach ben Yosef, and look what he says in number 22. Then it says, so there are two issues coming together. If we do not do tshuva, the Hamoraim shel ben Yosef, then there'll be the whole episode of Mashiach ben Yosef. That will happen if we do not go down a tshuva path. But if we do tshuva properly, then we will not end up having to suffer Mashiach ben Yosef, or Yirelanu Mashiach ben David Bitom. Either we'll get straight to Mashiach ben David, says Rav Saadia, Mashiach ben Yosef, and if we do have to have a Mashiach ben Yosef, Shaliach, then he will be like a Shaliach, just a precursor, a Mavaser, if you like, law, for Mashiach ben David. Ukumatakein, this word very important, Kumatakein Nauma, he'll have to fix up the nation, Ukumasakel Haderech, and pave the way for Mashiach ben David. So interesting, Rav Saadia says, and this is a big theme in the whole Geula discussion, there are two potential modes for Geula, and we've seen this in other sources. Be'ito achishena, the Gemara talks about this idea that the Geula, because of the Navi, it could either come in its appropriate time, when it's meant to come, or achishena, or it could be hastened if we do tshuva earlier. And the same idea that I brought you earlier in the sheet, that there's a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says the Geula will be ultimately in Tishrei, and Rabbi Yeshua says no, in Nisan. Why? Because they're reflecting these two modes. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says the Jewish people need to do tshuva in order to achieve Geula. That's why it's a Tishrei type a mode of Mashiach, because it's tshuva and masim tovim. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua says no, it can be just like we were redeemed without merit the first time in Nisan, so too we can be redeemed without merit the second time, also in Nisan. More about that another time, but not for now. So Rabbi Saadia, you see, talks Mashiach ben Yosef. He could come this way, he could come that way, but it's clearly a mainstream idea. The Orach Chaim as well. The Orach Chaim on Parshas Balak, where he talks about Darach Kochav mi Yaakov, that the star will come out from Yaakov, become Shevet, or the Shevet, the staff will come from Yisrael. He there says as well that there are two modes. Either ultimately Mashiach can come, and the Rambam, by the way, quotes these psukim in Parshas Balak as the explicit references in the Chumash to Mashiach. Either Mashiach can come like Yaakov, says the Rabbeinu, says the Orach Chaim, which means with a convoluted process. Look at what he says here. If we still are called Yaakov, Lo ya'irihem el Mashiach ben David aval Mashiach ben Ephraim yamut. Then we'll end up with Mashiach ben David, but Mashiach ben Yosef, he called ben Ephraim, will have to die. B'milchama rishona, in the war. But if we are like Yisrael, we'll be able to have Mashiach ben Yosef, who does not die. He says, Zafilo Otza Shevet Shehu Mashiach Baba Ephraim. There'll be a common miyut. He will stay, if you like, focused and alive, and he doesn't have to die. So too, the or Hashem of Rabbi Kreskas says there are lots of different ways of looking at this. He hasn't got into it in detail because it could happen in different modes. And finally, before we reach Rav Kook, number 25, the Ramchal. The Ramchal says here the following: Ki Mashiach ben Yosef hu besod hasmol. Mashiach ben Yosef here is coming from the left. We're not talking about contemporary Israeli politics here. We're talking about Kabbalistic ideas of left and right. V'hu besod hachitzoniyut. This is Mashiach ben Yosef represents a superficial preparation. Hatzarich l'chol hatikunim ha'ele. He needs to make tikkunim. He needs to establish the state, the road, if you like, before Mashiach ben David. Or Mashiach ben David, who besot yamin. He's coming from the Kabbalistic right. But Sarach sheyeh mitchaber elav, and they will have ultimately to join together. V'ha'geula shalema, and then we will have a geula shalema. Now, let's put all of this together with Rav Kook and talk about the famous hesped that he gave for Theodor Herzl in 1904. You still with me, Ali? You still here?
Yes, all good.
Excellent. Okay, good. We're on a roll. So again, I apologize for the, I can't see you at all, but I can see my screen, and hopefully we'll be able to understand this. Let's give a little bit of background for this. So as you know, Rav Kook was born and grew up in Russia. And in 1904, he managed to get a job in Yerushalayim. His father-in-law was able to bring him over, and he got a job as the chief rabbi of Jaffa. Of course, this was before Tel Aviv. There was no Tel Aviv at that stage. And he was the chief rabbi of Jaffa. And he arrived in May 1904. He actually arrived on Yom Yerushalayim to be. He arrived on the 28th of Iyar, which of course 63 years later would be the unification of Yerushalayim. So he arrived, and he probably needed to keep a low profile at the beginning. Why? Because he was looked at with some suspicion by both forces. On the one hand, the new Yishuv, which was largely secular in the second Aliyah, that's that stage. Of course, the first Aliyah was more religious, but they're more observant. But the second Aliyah was well underway there. Secular Russians, etc., kibbutz movement, etc. The Gani was set up, I think, just after this. The new Yishuv looked at him with some suspicion. You are clearly part of the religious establishment. You've come from Russia, and we don't think you're going to be supportive of our aspirations. But on the other hand, the old Yishuv in Yerushalayim, in Sfat, etc., looked at him also with suspicion, because they saw him as something of a modern figure. He was a maverick. He had haskalah, exposure when he was in Russia, and he had some unusual views even at that stage. So both of them looked at him with some level of suspicion. So Rav Kook, when he arrived, had to establish his credentials, and a few weeks after his arrival in Jaffa, Theodor Herzl suddenly died. And therefore he was presented with an opportunity on the one hand and a great crisis on the other, because they said to him, you need to give a hesped for Theodor Herzl. So what is he going to say? So I brought you here in English. It's only an extract from it, and it's not certainly not as good as reading it in the original Hebrew. And I recommend strongly that you do. But let's bring some ideas out from this and see if we can bring a lot of the themes together that we've had here. Now, so he quotes the pasuk in Zechariah, "Bayom hahu hesped hagadol b'Yerushalayim." There will be a great hesped, like the hesped for Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo. So Rav Kook wants to now explain to us what is Mashiach ben Yosef, what is Mashiach ben David, and how do these two ideas fit in with Geula and all the ideas that we've seen so far. So he says as follows: so it came about that throughout the exile, there is a seesaw effect of these two opposing forces. At times, there is exhibited a drive towards material, worldly success that flows primarily from the foundation of Yosef and Ephraim. Don't forget that Yosef is the archetypal success materially. He is a universal figure. He reaches out to Egypt, to the whole non-Jewish world. He feeds them, he sustains them. He has the big house in Memphis, Egypt, not Memphis, Tennessee, and he has the big chariot, and he's the Mishnah Lamelech, etc. So that's very much Hamashbir, the success financially. At other times, there is stirring of a spiritual drive, says Rav Kook, for observance of Torah, spiritual development, for awe and for love of God. And he will say that is the Yehuda mode, that is the Mashiach ben David mode. Since it is impossible for our nation to attain its lofty destiny other than by actualizing these two components, says you have to have both. This is why the classic sources, the Gemara and the Meforshim, talk about both Mashiachs, the universal symbolized by Joseph and the distinctive symbolized by Yehuda. Because we need both, he says, there arise in the nation proponents of each aspect. Those who would enhance spirituality, prepare the way for Mashiach ben David, whose focus is on the final destiny. Truly, he says, Professor Cook, the focus of life is spiritual attainment, except that the spiritual can only develop properly if it's accompanied by all the material acquisitions of which a full-bodied nation is in need. Those who address the material, general aspects of life prepare the way for Mashiach ben Yosef. So what he's set up here is a paradigm, and you can see where this is going. Mashiach ben Yosef has to come first to build the infrastructure, to build the nation, because we can't have Mashiach ben David unless we have a nation, an Israel, for him to come to. And therefore, these two forces will need to work together. Now, next paragraph, he says, when these two forces work at cross purposes as a result of the calamity of exile, short-sightedness, and disarray, these are the birth pangs of Mashiach, Chevle Mashiach, or to be more exact, the birth pangs of Mashiachs, Mashiachim. The psalmist writes that your enemies have defied, O Lord, that they have defied the footsteps of your messiahs. Ikvot Mashiachecha, two footsteps of two messiahs. So he says, now, since the major achievement of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is the general advancement of Kant, is accomplished by de-emphasis of the unique Jewish form, Mashiach ben Yosef cannot endure, so he is destined to be killed. Now, let's just catch up with what's going on here. The Rav Kook understands that because of the exile, because of the Galut, we have come to a way of thinking that we see these two Mashiachs, these two forces, as working at cross purposes. You can have one or the other. Either you can be a secular Jew who is successful in business and universal in focus, or you can be a religious Jew who is sitting in kollel in poverty and doesn't have any of the accoutrements of success in life. You choose. It's one or the other. He says that is a Golos mentality. All the way through history, we've assumed that these two things are incompatible, but that's actually not meant to be the case. Now, he says, Mashiach ben Yosef, which is Gashmi, it's physical, ultimately cannot endure. We cannot just be left with only a physical. So then he says, last paragraph on this page, when this happens, all will recognize the perversity of the situation, meaning we'll wake up, we'll look back and we'll say, Hayunu kachol mim. What were we thinking? We thought that there was a contradiction. There was never a contradiction. They will realize that it was wrong not to subjugate the universal dimension to the spiritual aspects, which is Israel's destiny, to the kingdom of David. They will lament him as one laments an only son. He's quoting from Zechariah, and grieve for him as one grieves for the firstborn son. Now, he says an interesting thing on this passage. The lamentation for an only child is bereft of hope for future children. Lo yaleinu, elderly parents who have lost their only son are totally forlorn. If the verse were to end on that note, it would spell utter doom. But the bitterness is mitigated by the intellect. Why? Intellect perceives the nation has produced the soul of the messiahs. And he goes on to explain, the nation is not, as Zechariah says first, like elderly parents who've lost their only child, but rather as young parents who've lost their firstborn child. That's what Zechariah said. Now, that's obviously a tragedy, but he says, being inexperienced at raising children, they did not attend properly to the child in its state of illness, so the child succumbed. But there's hope. There can be a future. By the same token, now he brings the mashal back into Zionism. By the same token, the nation came to the realization that it didn't know how to make proper use of the universalist dimension. We didn't really know how to use our money, did not understand how it could contribute to Israel's unique destiny. In that way, it could have survived. The nation labored under an illusion brought on by the divisiveness of exile that these two forces are truly at odds. The result is, he says, this is the situation in Galut, right when he is, now in the 1900s. The result is that whoever holds up the universal side of the nation becomes, unfortunately, an enemy of Torah mitzvahs. By the way, the context here is that at this stage, the religious elements of the Zionist Congress had been thrown out of the Zionist Congress and had formed Mizrahi, which was designed to try and bring Zionism, religious Zionism, to work maybe outside secular Zionism, because it had to, because it was detached from the Zionist Congress at this time. Therefore, he says people think that if you want to be religious, if you want to be Zionist, you have to be anti-religious. Contrary-wise, he says, whoever focuses on to be uniquely Jewish, you want to be religious, becomes an adversary of material well-being, meaning you think you have to sit in kollel and earn no money. You have to be poor. To be religious is to be poor. In the first scenario, he says, with the secular Jews, the fence of Torah is broken down. And in the second, the result is weakness and morosity. That's a fascinating statement, by the way. The Rav Kook is saying, do you think we're going to be able to build a nation off the back of the yeshivas? What you've got there, he said, is a culture of weakness and a culture of morosity. And you can't build a country on that. And then he brings it all together now. After this latest experience of Mashiach ben Yosef's impermanence, let us deduce that truly the two forces are not mutually antagonistic. It is time to bring it all together and to organize the nation's ways. Let every universal perfection serve as a basis for perfecting the uniquely Israelite. And let both parties, those disposed to the material and the universal, and those disposed to the spiritual and particularistic, come to the same conclusion. Then the lamentation will be on both sides and both will recognize that mistake. Meaning he's not blaming the secular Jews. He's saying that the secular Jews have made a mistake in thinking that you have to be poor to be religious and you have to be non-religious in order to be successful. And the yeshiva world has made a mistake, he says, because they're assuming that you have to eschew money and eschew material wealth and not build a country in order to stay connected with Torah. These two forces, finally in this bit, were created to be united. Once rent asunder, they were mutually injurious. And now he brings it back to Theodor Herzl. And this obviously got Rav Kook into some trouble at the time. Rav Kook tried as hard as he could to try and reach out to both of these sides and be a bridge, to use religious Zionism as a bridge between, on the one hand, the secular Israeli world and on the other hand, the Haredi old Yishuv. And whether he was successful or not, and whether the religious Zionist movement is successful or not, this is not our job to discuss now, but you can consider that over the course of, looking back over the last 100 years since Rav Kook. But now let's look at what he says now. The Zionist vision manifest in our generation might best be symbolized as Mashiach ben Yosef. So he says the Zionist movement is Mashiach ben Yosef. Not the Theodor Herzl is Mashiach ben Yosef, but the movement is. Zionism tends to universalism, as opposed to Jewish particularism. It is unequipped to realize that the development of Israel's general aspect is but the foundation for Israel's singularity. The leadership of the Zionist movement must be greatly influenced by the gifted few of the generation, the righteous and the sages of Israel. He has a very idealistic vision. He says the secular Zionist leaders have to get together with the Haredi leaders, and together they have to realize that they can help each other. Now, I don't know whether we see that or whether we see everybody just working for their own political needs. That's not for me to comment on. On the other hand, the ideal of Israel's national renaissance, including all the material accoutrements, which is a proper thing when joined to the spiritual goal, to date has not succeeded. And the lack of success has brought on infighting until finally the leader of the movement has fallen, a victim of frustration. It behooves us to take heart, to try and unify the tree of Joseph and the tree of Yehudah, to rejoice in the national reawakening, and to know that this is not the end goal of Israel, but only a preparation. And he basically, in the last paragraph there, he goes on to bring a crescendo, if you like, of psukim, so that he can end this in a flurry. Now, one second. Let me see where you've gone. Okay, fine, good. Can you see me again now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I hope that you were able to see the sheet and to look at that. But basically what we've got there is a fascinating analysis. Rav Kook does not, as people sometimes misquote him as doing, does not say that Theodor Herzl was Mashiach ben Yosef. He doesn't say that. He says that the Zionist movement led by Theodor Herzl has the potential to build the country and to be Mashiach ben Yosef, but as of 1904 had not yet done so. Now, one wonders if Rav Kook would have the ability to step off a plane, I don't know if need to be in a plane, but whatever, would have the ability to return to Eretz Israel today and to the state of Israel and look around, whether he would feel that what had been not yet accomplished in 1904 has now, 120 years later, has now been more accomplished. I'm sure that he would be amazed by what he sees around us, as I've lived here for 20 years. I'm still amazed when I drive around the country and see the infrastructure and the buildings and everything like that. There's no question that over the last 120 years, I think that history has proved this beyond a shadow of a doubt. The Zionist vision of building a country has been successful in terms of the universalist, in terms of the physical. Now, what needs to happen, clearly, he understands, is that there needs to be a rapprochement now between these two views. And whether that's happening or not is a good question. I'll leave you to ponder on that. But there's no doubt at all that that's how he sees the process of Geula. A secular state that realizes it doesn't have to be secular, and a religious yeshiva movement that realizes it doesn't have to be poor. And the two can come together and create the unity of Mashiach ben Yosef and the Mashiach ben David. Now, one of the things that we were not able to see in the source, one of the sources earlier in the sheet, you can look at it in your own time, is that there's also a very important idea, also brought in Zechariah, that whatever Geula is, and we looked at the beginning that it's going to be not necessarily the process of Mashiach, and Mashiach itself is more complicated than we thought. Whatever Geula is, it happens in a foggy way, it happens in an unclear way. A process which is neither day nor night, when it looks like evening, but it feels like morning. And there's a lot of discussion about this, that whatever is going to be foggy and unclear. And this, again, is not the way people usually see when they talk about redemption and they talk about Mashiach. Most people today imagine a kind of flashbang, immediate move from totally black to totally white, which is going to happen in a second. And all of a sudden, the whole world will change. This, of course, is a vision of Mashiach, but it is not the vision of the Rambam, and it is not the vision of the religious Zionist movement. It is the mystical vision of the Ramban and others who understand that Mashiach is conflated in many ways with the idea of Olam Haba. And that's, I think, what has taken root very strongly in the mindset of most Jewish people today, that they have gone down a mystical route, which is true. In many areas of life, they've gone down a mystical route, and they see Mashiach through the eyes of that mystical vision. What does that mean? That Olam Haba, Gan Eden, and Mashiach are all rolled into one, so that we won't need the world as we have it now. It'll be a magical world, a mystical world, and of course, Torah will change as well. There are many sources one can bring from the Ramban and others about this. As you probably know, the Rambam, Maimonides, has a different vision. He has a vision of Mashiach as Ein Bein Olam Hazeh Mosa Mashiach Ele Shibud Malchus Bilvad. He quotes this from Shmuel in the Gemara, that the key difference when Mashiach comes, even Mashiach ben David, is that the mindset of people. The people will no longer fight. People will no longer be competitive. The United Nations will actually work, not just as a theoretical talking shop, but as a real way to bring people together. Okay, so what have we seen? We've seen that there's a lot of aspects of Geula, Mashiach, which are not always focused in people's minds. Number one, the concept of Geula is not always what people think it is. People think that has to be Mashiach. We've seen, no, that does not necessarily have to be Mashiach. Geula is a process which is pre-Mashiach, which is getting our land back, getting our independence back. That's certainly the way Geula is seen through the prism of Tanakh. We've seen that even the idea of Mashiach itself is more complex than people feel. There are at least two sides to the process: Mashiach ben Yosef, which is a material building, a tikkun of the nation, and Mashiach ben David, which is the final stage of that, which is the Geula Shleima, in the words of the Ramchal. And we've seen just finally, briefly at the end, that even the idea of Mashiach ben David is debated between the mystics, which see it as being mystical and supernatural, and the view of the Rambam, which is much.
You've muted yourself.
It's more complex than people often think, and certainly I think should give us pause for thought. Now, I hope that those ideas came across fairly cogently. It's very difficult to give a shir on Zoom at the best of times. To give a shir on your phone in the lounge when I can't see what's going on around me is even harder. But I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and I apologize for the interruptions in service.
Well, you did a great job.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot to think about. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free. Ellie, you can feel free to give out my contact details to anybody. As I said, there are more shiurim on the website if people are looking for them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rabbi Manning, and thank you
very much
for hanging on.
Okay, no problem. Okay, we got there in the end. All the best. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Lovely. Thank you.